Hello all, and welcome to your first video lecture for your research course. As Christine and I discussed in your appropriate section, each module will include one or more recorded lectures based on the readings, based on the content that we are delivering within each module. Our lectures will not cover, and this is really important, they will not cover all of the material that you are expected to know for each core content area within each module. You're expected to be successful in this course. You must keep up on all readings assigned within each module. As you'll see, these might be chapters that we include, or they also might be online resources or other videos from other sources and other faculty across other universities. The lectures that Christine and I have developed are going to be very short, and they're overviews to discuss the core content from each module's area. In our experience, students need to watch both the lectures and ensure that they keep up on all the reading materials in order to understand the content fully and to develop a successful Capstone 2 project and be successful in this course. Please also know, we've discussed this, I'm just going to keep reiterating it, that you must keep up throughout this course. We have set up this course for you to be successful, but we have set it up in stages. And if you're not keeping up on the stages, the likelihood of you being successful is minimized. Those students who keep up usually have a much more simple time and are much more successful in this course. So this first video will be on how you select an approach. So what is a research approach? Basically, all of you will be choosing a concept to study, an idea to study, or following through on an assumption that you have from a clinical perception or that you have from reading other research materials. We're going to use the methodology section, the data collection, the analysis, and the interpretation to really define these ideas, to develop our approach, and to really think about how we're going to structure our research proposal. It's really important that we think about the problem you want to address, right? So developing the concept or the idea, the assumption you want to think about is important, but a lot of times students start off by not really thinking about what is the problem. So we must understand the problem in society or the problem within a clinical population or the case conceptualization that you are developing in this project as well. And what is that problem? That's going to help guide your approach. When we think about qualitative, we are going to be using inductive reasoning, and we're looking for meaning, right? It's really important in qualitative that we're looking for the meaning. We're going to be exploring and understanding people's meanings behind a specific problem. For your case, that's going to be your clinical case conceptualization, how you decide to materialize that, whether it's a community, a culture, etc. Qualitative begins to look for themes across the subjects or the groups that we're studying. And really, qualitative is looking to understand an idea that has really not been yet studied at all, right? So if you're doing, or very limited studies. And typically when we think about limited studies, they're studies that haven't been replicated, or they've been replicated with very small sample sizes, or an idea that's been studied across two different cultures that really have very different belief systems. And when we think about groups that have not been studied, you can't do quantitative until we have something studied, right? So we are doing qualitative to really begin to either develop theories or develop the ideas. So what is inductive reasoning, right? So we're going to talk about inductive and deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is looking from this bottom left to the top right, right? So first we observe, then we look for patterns, then we develop potential hypotheses, and then we end up developing a theory for most, right? So we're really looking from that observation to actually understanding an idea. When we look at quantitative, we're looking at things that have been studied before, things we want to put numeric value to, and we're looking at deductive reasoning. We already have a theory and we want to test that theory, right? So if we go back a slide, we're looking at qualitative, where we're starting from an observation and ending at a theory. In quantitative, we already have that theory set because we have qualitative or exploratory studies before us. And we're looking at the relationship between two or more variables. And often, most often, we are looking to generalize or replicate these findings. If you think about a lot of the clinical interventions that you're using at your internship sites. Trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy in general. A lot of the studies, starting from the original studies, if you're looking at CBT and Beck, or TFCBT and Mannarino and Cohen, when they continue to replicate, they're looking to ensure that, number one, that if I did a study with 100 people, I want to do it with another 100 people and show that the similar results are coming out. And that means that evidence-based practice is stronger. Or they're looking at taking it from one culture to another culture, right? So a group that has not been studied before, and taking the results, let's say, from, if you look at TFCBT, they started in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, and they began to study in different areas of our country to make sure that this intervention holds up across regions, across different groups. So basically, deductive reasoning is flipping our inductive reasoning flowchart, and we start with a theory. Again, you're testing a theory, and you develop hypotheses from that, things you want to prove, and then we actually observe, right? So we collect data to actually confirm our hypotheses. And this is looking at those side by side, right? So again, inductive is from observation up to theory, right? So you start with the observation, we look at some patterns, then we begin to develop hypotheses and a theory, and that's qualitative, versus the deductive reasoning, where we already have a theory that we want to prove and we want to test, and we develop hypotheses from that, and then we observe, or we collect the data, another thing for observing, and we confirm that this is true or null. And again, that's your quantitative piece. So we're not going to spend a ton of time in this course on mixed methodology. And the reason is, this is a very short course, and you're really just developing a research proposal to look at an idea, to look at a problem that you found in your internship or your personal life where you develop your case conceptualization. Mixed methodology takes a little bit more time, is a little bit more intense, and most of the time students stick with qualitative or quantitative. Christine and I, depending on your section, will support mixed methodology if there's a really good rationale behind doing it. But basically, mixed methodology combines qualitative and quantitative. And it's really necessary for us to have a complete understanding of the idea, of the theory, of the concept of the problem we're studying, to combine these two. And when you look below, there's 3 bullets, right? There's quan for quantitative, or qual for qualitative. When one is all capitalized, so the first bullet is quan and qual are capitalized, that means the quantitative piece and the qualitative piece hold equal importance. The second bullet is quan is capitalized, right? And the qual is lowercase. So it means quantitative takes precedence. It's a more important piece of this, and you're using qualitative to help explore those quantitative results. And the secondary is, the third bullet is qualitative is capitalized and quantitative is lowercase. So the qualitative, the meaning, the exploration is the most important, but we're adding some quantitative data or data collection to it to try to either prove some of those results or also kind of set up the next level of studies. Another part of your section 1 will be your framework, right? Conceptual framework for qualitative or theoretical framework for quantitative. We're going to go through different frameworks, and this a lot of times takes a lot of support from your faculty members. But the primary thing here is that we have to understand our own worldview, where we're coming from, right? You each have your own biases. You each have your own worldview and perspective, which is why you're studying what you're studying, whether it's personal family matters, or it is a friend who you've seen something, or it's something you're interested in from the news or from prior studies. Or for most of you, for this is how we set this up, is that it's all about your internship site, right? And a client or a cluster of clients that you saw. So we're really looking at our own perspective and worldviews and why we're doing what we're doing. So if I look at an example, right, and I say, I want to study the impact of autism on siblings, right? There could be so many perspectives and frameworks behind that. So I could ask, are you interested in the siblings' meaning making behind having a brother or sister with autism? Like, what does that mean to them? Or are we looking at the, right, so that's probably qualitative. Or B, are we looking at the causes of how the sibling adjusts, which is probably more quantitative. So now we're going to run through a few different frameworks that we're going to be covering throughout the process. Post-positive. So in the previous example, this is the interest of the cause of sibling adjustment, right? And we're going to discuss these in more detail in the use of theory. So this is very traditional research, traditional scientific method. It determines the effects and or the outcomes of what we're doing. You need to know this and identify what might have caused or impacted the outcome, right? So this is looking at what might have caused a sibling adjustment, such as how much attention the parents had to pay to the child with autism and how they weren't able to pay as much attention to the sibling. Constructivist, again, if we use that example, this is in the interest in the sibling meaning making behind having a brother or sister with autism. Here I'm trying to look at what is the siblings' understanding of the world, right? What is their world? It's their perspectives, right? It's all about their perspectives and their views. So their parents might have been wonderful, right? Have been home and been taking them and doing things, but their worldview on the attention that their sibling gets, etc. And this is almost always qualitative. Transformative was developed because research believed that the post-positivists were very strict and they wanted to develop this other perspective to lead to more justice, right? Because post-positivists, they believed, led to more injustice and oppression within certain research groups, and that we needed more cultural sensitivity. This framework does lack empirical backing, right? Just because there's not as many studies done within this framework as post-positivists or constructivists. But it believes in the intersectionality of one's world, right? So if we think about when you look at conclusions, often studies will say blacks have this percentage of something and whites have this percentage, versus saying blacks who live in higher socioeconomic status and are Democrats have X, right? And blacks who live in lower socioeconomic status. So looking at intersectionality within culture. That's another reason this is not studied as much, is because it's a little bit more difficult, right? It takes more time and funding to be able to study all this intersectionality. But it's a really important framework, and I think as we think about a lot of you in community mental health, probably a framework that might guide some of your work. Pragmatic typically is mixed methodology. It's usually just simply looking at how do we apply, right? How is this actually going to work in the real world, and is this going to be able to solve a problem? So how in the world do you actually decide what methodology and framework? Well, we will support this process, but really begin to think about as you're reading the literature. Is there a theory to back up your idea? Right? That might help you decide if I'm qualitative or quantitative. If there's already been a theory, you might be leaning to quantitative unless we want to study with a new group, or unless we want to really make a change, which we can support that process. Has this ever been studied before? What's your own worldview? What are your perspectives? Right? We need to not be prisoners of our own perspectives when we're looking at the literature. When we're looking at the literature, and we'll have a lecture right after this one on using the literature, you need to ensure that you're looking at the literature from both sides, the ones that are kind of on your perspective or your worldview, and the ones that argue against that perspective. That's a good literature search. Are you looking at underrepresented groups? And again, we need to understand what is the problem. So that's the end of your first lecture. Our next lecture will be on using the literature.